language came way after experience and emotion. So we can always only explain a fraction of what it is we're trying to explain, because what we're explaining is actually an experience, and it's grounded in emotion and feeling. And I guess, how do you walk that line between being interested in making sense of that stuff versus just shutting that part of your brain off and immersing yourself into the experience of it?
I think that we should do it, and I'm going to say this in a musical term because that makes most sense to me, by playing it like an instrument. Our search for meaning is actually so that we can understand ourselves more and how we interact with the world. I had a conversation with somebody talking about an AI music making software, and I referred to AI as a tool, and they said, well, actually, we think it's more like an instrument. And I was like, that's interesting, because you learn how to play the instrument and you learn how to interact with it. A tool suggests that you go to it for a very specific thing, and it acts for you. Like you pick up a hammer in order that you can hammer in a nail. I mean, it's pretty limited what you get from that. The context that they're referring to for the AI is actually that it's something that you play with. And I think that is a really good way to understand the seeking part of us that looks to engage in understanding these different types of ways of looking at things, ways of understanding what our position is in the world, what love means, the huge questions that we as humans are all interested in understanding the answer to, where there is no real definitive, this is the answer to that, love equals, X, Y, Z. It just is, they're all feelings. So to get to the bottom of that, we have to actually play it rather than seek an answer from it.
And playing it is partially absorbing it and becoming it.
Yeah, because if you think about somebody who's playing a guitar, if you're and you have to learn how to play the guitar first, right? So there's some kind of picking it up and understanding the structure of how to do chords and stuff. But then there's also the point where you get to this thing where it clicks, and all of a sudden you can just rip, and you're in flow with that thing at that point. You talk about time and space goes sometimes when we're in the middle of a conversation. I think that's what happens as well when you're in a kind of flow state. Certainly any artist would say that when they're playing or drumming or singing even or whatever. If you're on the football field, you're not thinking about what you've got to do afterwards or what happened before. You're dead in the moment there, and most alive in that moment as well.
Yeah.
So the interesting part of that for me is trying to reach that state more, and the paradoxical part of being able to reach that state is you've got to completely let go. You have to absolutely surrender and be in the moment to whatever happens, and that's when you kind of remove yourself and you get to kind of, well, you're not paying it, you're not trying to, there is no analyzing part of the brain active at that state.
So essentially what you're saying is to refer to your metaphor about picking up the guitar to begin with before you can play it. There is a part through which you study some of that stuff through interest. You become interested in it. You follow that information. You read. You study. But you do that not to get drunk on that knowledge and to mentally get off on all that knowledge and all those beautiful quotes and all the stuff you're reading. The real transformation happens when you sit with some knowledge or something you read that makes sense to you rationally as well as intuitively, but absorb it by practicing it, and through that practice experiencing it in real life. Otherwise, you're just speaking about a concept abstractly without really transforming yourself internally. And we always talk about the realm of feeling and emotion being really the universal currency, and the knowledge essentially just being there for us, just being there so that we can make sense of why we should be practicing being a certain way. Like when we read the Bible and it tells you, for example, be still and know that I am God. And then you read research and you read text about how important it is to meditate in order to declutter and to elevate your state of emotion. That makes sense to you, but moving from there to practicing that and absorbing that are still two different levels. And more often than not, it happens that we just read something and we like it and makes sense to us, but we get almost stuck in the beauty of words without actually practicing those. And I think that's where the gold is to be found, is realizing that, well, if I just read it and I just scroll and I read the next thing and I read the next thing, what I'm doing is I'm chasing knowledge without absorbing, incorporating, experiencing, and practicing it. And by doing so, I am just operating at the realm of my prefrontal lobe, just reading and reading and learning. But there is not the component of experiencing it emotionally, which is where you become. And you see that a lot with people, the people that truly lift you up. When you feel that you're with someone and you speak to someone and all of a sudden your emotional state changes, it's when someone doesn't just speak about something that they know abstractly. It's when someone embodies that. And through that embodiment, there's a certain level of certainty when someone speaks because he became that then inspires you. When you listen to the people like Tony Robbins, for example, he does communicate the knowledge and he does communicate the information, but he also is that. He became that. He experienced that as part of his upbringing, and he practices what he preaches. Because he put that into practice, he can animate people then to a higher energetic state, right? And what do you do to shut off your rational mind that just wants to seek knowledge to just, doing it and practicing it?
It's a good question, because I've I've put time aside to reading. Like, my preferred method of learning things is to read. So I can do that through audibles, or I can do that with books. But I've set time in my calendar where I'm like, this is my reading time, which I've mentioned before. I quite look forward to that part of the day because I'm off my phone and I'm not contactable by anyone else. So it's just me and my learning at that point. But that has to be a window of time, because otherwise you can go down a rabbit hole of just trying to know everything about a particular subject. But for what? I'm just interested in a lot of things, but I wanna kind of focus in on the areas that I know need the most amount of work for me. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's an encouraging thing for people to do, is to locate within yourself what it is that you want to improve on, and then go and search out ways in order to patch those things together. So for me at the moment, that is in business, it's in my spirituality, it's in, X, Y, Z, but it's different for everybody. But you should cap that as well, because like you're saying, if you don't have time to go out and experience, like, honestly, play, and by play I mean engaging in activities which aren't you trying to understand or make sense of information, but are actually you acting out and enjoying living life. That's just equally as important as the learning process and the constantly trying to level up. Because once again, the more you try and achieve some particular thing, the more that the balance of the other is being weighed out. So if you're just on a crusade to learn everything from again, the question would be like, for what? You've got to get out there and have fun with it. And this is why Tuesdays are great, because we have the balance of both of those things for us on these days. Yeah. But that's an important thing to understand, is that everything is a balance. And if you don't have that balance, then you don't feel fulfilled. And the happiness is a balance of that. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just important. To answer your question, how do I keep that balance then? How do I quiet that part of my mind, did you say? Mm-hmm. is by making sure that I have equal amount of time across these other kind of parts of my life. Like if I have everything's color coded in my calendar, and again, that's me being almost too organized. One of the things that I enjoy being that way. I think it helps me stay balanced across these different things, is to make sure that I can see per week this for a little bit of time. Make sure that you're giving yourself some time with friends. Make the Blue Zones documentary they have on Netflix. They took the elements from these different areas that matched, that were aligned with each other, despite them being one in Japan, one in the Mediterranean, one somewhere else. There's things which have led to a long, happy, successful life, and they are obvious things like, eat good food, make sure you're walking a lot, raising your heart rate, going up and down things. But they're also social interactions. They're also being around people. I think it sounds obvious, but it's just important to make sure that those things are part of your day-to-day experiences as well, because you can shut yourself away and you will literally die of loneliness.
Yeah. And I think there's also a case to be made for someone experiencing all of the stuff that you can be reading, and that person being even less interested in educating themselves or reading about it because they've already transcended that. They're so much embodying the play and the empathy and the giving and the just being of all those states that we know or educate ourselves about practicing on a daily, that they're less interested in that. So when you said it's a balance of both, there's also a case to be made that just being it is maybe even more important than reading about it. And I do think, at least for me, that was the case. It almost seemed to be a sequential process. I was interested in it, and I wanted to educate myself about religion, about esoterics, about quantum physics, about psychology, about evolutionary biology, about chemistry. But then you can just, if you're not aware enough, you can just follow that thread, and it's infinite. You could literally go down that rabbit hole and never experience that and practice that, because everything sounds great in abstraction, and it's interesting too, right? To read about it, to think about it. There is something nice about being stimulated mentally and thinking about it. But then there is this whole other realm, which is the experiencing all the stuff that you're reading. And from the level of the universe, feeling transcends abstract knowledge. And I think a lot of it is, yes, setting time aside to play. It's being with friends, doing the things that you enjoy doing the sports, going to the gym, running, whatever it is that gets you in that state, creating for you. It's music, right? Or for us now, it's speaking about it. That's one of those outlets where you just are.
You know what the most important thing that you're saying at the moment really is, though? It's that experience supersedes knowledge. Like, we can read about peanut butter and jelly sandwiches as much as we want, but until we taste that and experience it, we have no idea. So it doesn't matter how much you read about Jesus in the Bible, how much you read about Buddhism, or how many times you've read the Tao Te Ching. If you're not applying any of those things in your life, or if you're not able to draw from them at any given opportunity, you're in a conversation, somebody says something, you get a little bit annoyed. If you're not able to go, I said to myself, I think about this.
Yeah,
that's all good. Jesus would do this. Or, you have that thing in your ear. You said a minute ago about so-and-so's in my ear. And that's a good thing, because you've got an awareness there that there's something that can give you a voice of reason. Mm-hmm. This is the sound mind thing again.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's good to have an understanding of these different viewpoints from great thinkers, great people that have stood the test of time, essentially. Most of these prophets, or except the books that we're reading and the things that we're learning about, even if it's from Jeff Bezos's autobiography, like there's going to be valuable information in there. Reading it's one thing, using that and actually processing it and then putting it into a part of your decision making so that you have a broader, more diverse, more more breadth and depth to the way that you approach situations in your life is the key element. And I'm nowhere near that, but I think learning about it helps me see things from a wider perspective, because otherwise I'm only going to be narrow-minded.
And I think the key word was implementing it in your decision making. This voice of knowledge and reason through reading these books, be it Jesus' word, be it esoterics, be it science, that allows you to know what you should be doing. But then being at the point of decision making where someone on the phone is pissing you off and you're like, I should be treating that person how I want to be treated. So me snapping at that person is probably not how I would like to be treated. So in that moment, having that voice of knowledge, of reason, to give you that 1 second where you don't react, but take a breather and then respond coherent with the message that you have learned about, that's where you become that and put that into practice. And that's also the biggest challenge, because when we're in the day-to-day situations, we forget about a lot of that stuff that we're reading. Why? Because everything that you're reading is abstract and knowledge. It's not at the level of feeling. When you go to your day-to-day, when things happen that, for example, annoy you, like the car that cuts you off or the person that's unfriendly to you, you react to that emotionally. So within that emotional reaction, keeping that voice of reason in mind is the hardest thing to do, because your system is set up for you to not have reason override emotion, but the other way around. Your system is set up for you to react emotionally and put that voice of reason aside. So part of that training or part of that repetition of that knowledge is also having that in the right moment, taking over the emotional response or capping that. And for that, you need that the bridge of knowledge and emotion, or I should say where it both comes together, is through awareness. Is in that moment, not reacting, not responding, but just being aware of what's going on within you, and then choosing the response. And it seems to be like the more you know about things, the more you are convinced that that is the right state of being. So the more you've educated yourself, it's part of that training. And the second part of that training is the awareness taking over, because you could know everything after the fight is over, but you didn't practice it. And you're like, oh, damn, I knew I should have been still. Oh, I know I should have given him gratitude or her gratitude. But in that moment, that emotional response was just so strong that you set that aside, right? So part of it is the awareness of that. And I think for that, you specifically, or me, we're practicing meditation that allows us to just get a grip on that initial reaction and then choosing the response rather than react to it in that moment.
Yeah, certainly meditation is been a game changer for me. Once again, because we're just in an overstimulated world. Phones and coffee and things flashing all the time, and things trying to take our attention. There's so many things going on. We're also people that are trying to achieve things. So it's good to be still. It's good to practice stillness. That's what meditation's teaching me. Again, because I'm somebody that can react quickly to things. And I feel that part of me bubbling up sometimes. Like, we're all human, right? We're having the human experience. So we're naturally going to be in the emotional thing that we keep referring back to, that we have these capacity to reach these different emotional states is our superpower, but is often the thing that trips us up, because we overreact often, over emotionally to things, because we're loaded with feelings, and it upsets us because it reminds us of something in the past or makes us feel a certain type of way or XYZ. And that every time that we overreact to something in a situation, it's a part of us that we've not dealt with from before. We will keep having the exact same situation, masqueraded slightly differently.
Yeah.
In our relationships, in our personal and not so personal lives in every. I feel like, you know, when you have deja vus, like that's kind of what that is like for me. It's like I've been here before. Have I learned though? Like, am I going to experience this again? And I've had very clear situations which have been repeated again and again in my life where I haven't learnt the lesson, or I've chosen to ignore it, which will keep coming up because that is the way that it works. You can't avoid a situation for the rest of time. Inevitably, it will re-raise itself until you've dealt with it.
Do you have an example?
My visa was one of them.
Because that
Me being single is another one of them. Like it's just, I'm going to have to deal with parts of myself until I get to a point where I've represented the person, the perfect partner that I'm searching for. So I need to be that. This is the being thing. And I know that as well from when I keep thinking about a bee. I mentioned this before, I think, but like bees go about and do their business, don't they? They're from flower to flower, and if bees weren't around, we wouldn't be around. And obviously that is in their name as well. They're just being, dude. We can do so much more of that.
So in terms of your visa, for example, you obviously know what to do. You have all your practices in place.
We don't have to talk about this again, do we?
Well, I'm just curious about if you're at a state where, and that could be a visa, it could be anything, where you know what to do. You do all the right things. You specifically, like, you practice, you meditate, you eat well, you sleep well, you work on good relationships with people, and yet the situation happens and you're not reacting in a way that you should be reacting to it, or you're not responding in a way you should be responding to it. And in this case, you can't say that, or we can't use the excuse that you just didn't know any better, because you have educated yourself to the extent where you should be responding to it that way, but still you don't. And I feel like for a lot of us, that's a challenge. We know what the right thing is to do. We've read about it. We know the studies. We know what Jesus says. We know what Buddha says. And then the moment comes and we don't live up to it.
That's the applying it again. Like, we know what we need to do, but the greater the challenge feels, the more we're going to put it off. There's just resistance. You can't avoid that in life. Resistance to do things that feel hard or feel big or feel uncertain. But on the other side of resistance is the dream. The bigger the resistance, the bigger the dream. My dream is not to be living in Swindon. I love Swindon. Please, trust me, I do. But I don't want to live there. I like living in America. It's my goal to be out here. So I need to make sure that that's taken care of. And I didn't. So I learned a lesson from that. I learned a lesson the first time. I learned a lesson the second time. Question is, have I learned the lesson so that doesn't happen again? I would hope so.
Mm-hmm. So to a certain degree, we have to suffer from certain outcomes before we learn them, independent of the abstract training we come with.
Yes. It has to be applied. Otherwise, we're just going to keep living out the same thing.
And the quicker we learn from it, the quicker and smoother your path towards your desired goals and states. Because that could happen to you 10 times in different forms. Maybe not with the visa, but you not learning from a negative outcome.
It's happening to me on much smaller levels with other things. And I feel like I'm definitely repeating myself. But chocolate bars is some area that it keeps happening for me. Like, I'm definitely in a much better condition than I've ever been in. But I also still have this tendency to go to the sweet thing. And if I don't have clear set rules for myself, off I go. So there's and that's a repeating pattern. Like, we all have patterns in us that we need to address. Mm-hmm. It's up to us to distinguish what they are, and then it's up to us to decide whether we want to change them or keep them.
That also reminds me that there's a certain level of goal setting pattern involved in that. So in the case of the chocolate bar, you have
Willy
this
Wonka, bro.
Willy Wonka, that short
Willy
term
Wonka? Dude, he sounds sexy. He's at Piranha for sure.
piranha.
Willy Wonka.
Willy Wonka.
Very nice to see you.
So you have that. You want to eat the bar. You get that short-term happiness, but the long-term goal would be to remain in shape, right?
Yes.
To be in good.
Yeah.
So essentially, it's the awareness of that little bit of joy that you get from the chocolate bar may or may not outweigh the grander goal. And more often than not, it does not outweigh the grander goal. But we fail to shift perspective right before it happens, right?
Yeah.
But if I was there and I told you, bro, this is actually, let's do this thought experiment. When you're about to go and eat the chocolate bar when you're alone, if someone was there around you and say, hold a picture of you up there in your peak shape, it's like, bro, this
Dude, I'd throw it out the window.
This is exactly.
And I don't even have a window that I can open. I'd flush it down the
in
toilet.
the trash, yeah.
It's also, there's a level of naughtiness to this. When I was back in England, one of my mates was saying to me, he gets it. So he was brought up a Catholic. You weren't allowed to have wine in his house. You know, there's a level of naughtiness where even now, as a 40-something-year-old guy, when he goes to the store, he gets excited to buy a bottle of wine. What I do on my own with the door closed versus what I would do in front of somebody else, there's still a disparity there. And I need to get that right, because it's me I'm going to be living with till the rest of my life. So if I'm not able to just be comfortable with my own decisions, then I'm letting myself down each time. And it's always you go to bed that night after eating all the chocolate and going, dude, I'll start again tomorrow. Okay, it's going to be flat. And that's good. Give yourself some grace and make sure, but also don't bullshit yourself the next morning and start again.
Yeah, and we find ways to negotiate with ourselves. Once we do it once and twice, it gets much easier to negotiate. So there are two things, right? So you have to have a grander goal that allows you to shift perspective. Because if you don't have the grander goal, let's say in that case, of the healthy body and the healthy mind, there's nothing to shift perspective to. You just eat the chocolate bar. So there's one thing, it's framing everything into a grander picture and a long-term picture rather than a short-term small picture. And the second thing is the fact that, the fact that someone is watching over you. Like if someone else was there, you wouldn't be doing it. But when you're alone, you're doing it. So it's almost like that trainer that pushes you in the gym to go a level further. When you're alone, you can't do it. So it's the same thing. It's like, because the doors are closed and you're not reporting to anyone, you get away with that.
Yeah.
So it's both having that goal and also shifting that awareness essentially to an observer who is not there physically, but a grander observer that tells you, dude, don't eat that bar. The better you get at that, I think the less you're going to need someone to tell you what to do and what not to do. And I think a big part of that in this case would be having some relationship with the divine, because now you're baptized. Now it's Jesus on your shoulder, dude, telling you, don't eat that chocolate bar.
Facts, dude. And the same as you call it your higher self, doesn't matter. Yeah. It's moving yourself closer to the version. It's raising your level of consciousness to the point where you know that that's the voice you're listening to, not the one that wants you to stay where you are, which is your bollocky ego. Mm-hmm. You're all good, bro. It's another chocolate bar. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
You had a long
Start
day.
Tomorrow.
You had a long day, man. You've
and also,
been so good for 5 days in a row.
That's exactly the point. and on top of that, it's almost not agreeing with what we were talking about earlier, which is like, you need to be able to play as well. Yeah, you do, but it's not you need to be ironclad with your decisions with yourself. Tony Robbins says, do not negotiate with yourself, because he knows full well that you will negotiate yourself in or out of whatever you want to achieve. Mm-hmm. And I like the fact that there's the yourself is different to because if you want to call it your higher self, it's still yourself. It has to be the part of you which is separate from you somehow. Like, otherwise Puya will convince you to do the thing.
I understand you're saying that there needs to be an external entity watching over you. And
yeah, but you don't agree with that, though. That's not how you view God.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I could be better if it was completely severed from me. So I do understand the utility of completely externalizing that divine entity, because it does exactly what you're saying. It allows you to have that voice of reason, which is completely outside of you, speak to you. It's almost like having a coach, a life coach, a fitness coach, a diet coach, a mental coach with you at all times that is not you. So that voice can speak to you all the time, and you're like, yeah, you're right. And I can also see that if you don't sever yourself from that voice, if you view it as the ideal version of Mark or the ideal version of Puya, maybe you're more likely to negotiate with it. And I think some of it comes down to how disciplined you can be and you are. There are some people that can probably do it without externalizing a divine voice that speaks to them, and that can just speak to a higher self and just be kind of like spot on with that. But for most people, I think that's going to be difficult.
Can I add one more thing?
Of course.
I saw someone saying something yesterday which made me think outside of my usual context. He's talking about imagination. Your imagination is limited to what you can imagine. However, when you interact with me or with Alex or with someone else, you're also then subject to their imagination too. And they can oftentimes allow you to think bigger than you thought before, or think different or added to. So you're limited by your imagination. Imagination is endless, but it's absolutely infinite when you involve somebody else into that process who thinks things differently to you. Now imagine yourself sat at a table with 7 other incredible imaginations. Where do you go then? And the reason I say that is because I often I'm in there thinking about stuff, and I've even in my wildest imagination, I'm still limited to my view on that. There's still going to be the wall where I hit, where I can't think of anything else until someone else says something to me, and then I go, oh yeah, that would be wicked. What if we did? And then all of a sudden you're off again, and it's exploding out of you.
And that's why you need that interaction with other people, because we borrow imagination from one another to that extent.
This is the same as what we were talking about last week with the giving other people energy. If you're around people that also share great... When I'm around other awesome musicians, other wicked artists, I become more animated. I believe in my ideas more. They allow me, by being themselves, especially like I was sat with a guy who's incredible with the vocals, and he was just knocking stuff out, singing along to bits, throwing out ideas, and I just got into it. All of a sudden I was throwing out things, and I don't sing, bro, but I was into it because he was so himself in that moment that I believed that I could be even more me. That sounds weird, right? But you get it.
You were able to also snap out of your ego more and operate in the realm of exploration and play. I
was purely in flow in that moment because I wasn't worried about how someone would take me. It was just like we were riffing on each other. That's what great conversation is, when you're like, oh yeah, but I can't believe it. Oh yeah, but also this and then that and then this, and you just keep going. Dude, this the best.
With music, that must be crazy because a lot of times there's no speech involved, or if there is speech involved, it's also supplemented with...
It just gets into
pure sound.
Excitement.
It's pure like creativity and play, and very little rationality involved in there. So you're just floating in this transcendental space together.
Unreal.
That's unreal, man. I can only imagine.
It's just like, again, to make it about you and I, and for people that understand anything in a sports sense, if you're in the middle of a rally in tennis... Like it's just reactionary. There's some beautiful poetry happening there.
Yeah,
and that's the same when it's through ball on a Tuesday night and then across to Milan. It just happens. All of a sudden we're back at the going. Yeah, that was amazing. You never even saw that come in because it was reactionary. But it's just threaded and woven together in some beautiful way.
So it's almost like the creative play of the individuals are in sync. Their creativities 100%. Are in sync.
And that seems to happen the most when everyone's least concerned with how they're being viewed. Obviously, like, you know, you remove yourself as much as possible and you just engage with the that's it. You're playing in the moment. You're engaging with the being.
Yeah.
And you're being with everyone else that's in the room or on the field or wherever.
And it's
sorry, I'm still so excited. Yeah. But think about it again in a concert perspective. Everybody on a dance floor, everybody in a concert, you see everybody moving in unison.
Yeah.
That's it. They're being. Mexican wave.
Yeah.
Like no one's thinking about what time is it going to come round, or like, are we going to do it right? Am I going to put this hand up before that hand? No, everybody, you just wait. Ole! And then it happens. It's perfect unison. Everyone knows their part. No one questions it. They just be.
And I think, and being will always trump sense making.
Yes.
So when you're there with someone that brings you out to be, automatically you're not going to think about making sense and being logical about it.
No.
You will
also, they're the most fun people to be around. Like you,
and that's why to bring it back to what you do, that's why artists are so popular, because they raise mass energy by putting them into that state of being and feeling. That's why they're transcending teachers and scientists and researchers, because they operate at the frequency of energy. That's a different frequency. You can't get there with the thinking part. And that brings us back to the conversation of accumulating knowledge and studying versus applying it, being it, and experiencing it.
Yeah.
That's a very important part to remember, is you can absolutely infinitely research and never be. As a matter of fact, I would say over 90% of the people that read a nice quote online or a nice verse in the Bible, they don't sit with it at least a few days to absorb it. They just jump onto the next and onto the next and onto the next, and you're going to get drunk on words.
Yeah, I absolutely need to sit with stuff a lot more. And I totally agree with what you're saying. I think it's so true. And there's going to be quotes that resonate with people more than other ones. But once again, you're making sense of it after the fact. So certain quotes are going to mean more to you at different points in your life, at different days of the week. You know, if I asked you to name your top quote right now, it'd be different to what it might be in 3 weeks' time or a year ago. It's just an interesting way to think about stuff. But the key is in not thinking about stuff too much. We had this conversation last week. We both know that we analyze a lot. Yeah. Which is good. It's a good quality to have, because there's a part of us which is constantly trying to make sense of how we're interacting with things, which is good because it's an opening up of our awareness. But also we can become quite introverted that way as well if we're constantly in our own heads trying to figure out stuff when we could really just be there engaging in it.
I think deep within both you and I and most people know intuitively what they should be doing and what's right and what's wrong. For me, our conversations or the reading or the audible and going through those quotes and thinking about them is a form of prayer. And what I mean by that is, because we're beings of both divine and ego, we're both temporary and permanent at the same time, we always are going to be victim to falling back into our short-sighted, egoistic behavioral patterns. For me to stay aware, to fine-tune that awareness in order to then be aware when the situation arises and act coherently with how I want to act, I need to practice some sort of prayer. So that reading, that speaking to you about it, for me is a daily practice to do that. And it's different for different people. People like to go to church. People like to read. People like to meditate. Whatever that is, it's necessary. And at the same time, you have to be aware that without practicing it, it doesn't really mean anything. What I mean by it doesn't mean anything is it's not going to get you where you want to get if you don't practice it. It's just going to sound nice. Mm-hmm. And if there's one thing that I learned is just, it's almost like a flick, like a switch. Sometimes I'm like, okay, stop. Off. Now practice it. Don't think this through. Off. Done. Lights off.
Good.
Do. I had to learn that the hard way, because I was going at 500 miles per hour thinking I'm solving the puzzles of the universe.
Yeah.
There's nothing to be solved. It's already solved.
I know this feeling so much.
You know, it's like, stop. And now when it gets too much, now I train myself to shut that off and go into meditation, because that's being. Then you practice it. Then you
Then you
are
practice
it.
the feeling of it.
The feeling of
Yes.
it. Feeling it, right? Putting those beautiful words you read somewhere into practice.
Yeah.
That's the most important part.
Yeah. Absolute gold from you there. Absolute gold. When you said tune in, I kept thinking about a radio tuner thing. It's almost, I read the Bible for various reasons, but like you say, like there's a frequency that you can tune into by tried and tested methods. And it can be a spiritual book. It could also be Tony Robbins, and it could also be some motivational quote. It could be whatever floats your boat, whatever thing gets you to the point where you're like, okay. Tune into what that is for 5 minutes a day.
Yeah.
Then go about your day. The tuning in part is the practicing.
Yes.
The conversation that we have every Tuesday is the practicing. If you didn't kick a football for the next 3 years, I wouldn't want to play with you on a Tuesday night. I mean, I still would, of course, but like I would know that you might be a bit rusty. What coming here with the drunken sailor? You know?
Yeah.
So we have to be prepared to do the practicing part of it, which is the kicking it around, which is, again, back to our beginning of the conversation, which is the act of assimilating it into our actual daily life and practicing the act of playing it out.
Yes. And practicing it and being it will also transform you as an individual, including making you more confident and self-trusting. Because the more you read about something and know about something and not doing it, you're violating essentially what you know you should be doing. So you know you should be that and act like that, but all you do is read because it feels good, and it can very easily tilt towards the ego. Like, see how much I know about this.
Yeah.
See how smart I am.
Then you become some spiritual guy that's just chatting all the time. And no one cares, dude.
Yes. And you can distinguish when you speak to some person whether they have actually experienced what they're talking about or they just have abstract knowledge about it. It's two very different forms of energy when someone speaks about it. And very easily when you ask a few questions, you already know.
Yeah.
That guy just read a quote somewhere, read a page somewhere, and then went about their day and just said, I'm going to speak about this. I'm going to sound good. Versus the one that went through the struggle of assimilating what it was that they learned. And as a result of that, become that. And then as a result of that, the effect you're going to have on people is going to be magnetic.
Yeah.
Versus the other one is going to be more repelling. People smell that. We all have that inherently within us, to see who's BSing, who's actually that.
Yeah, and you can just tell. You can just tell.
You can.
Because they've experienced it. Yeah, yeah. So true, dude. Absolutely bang on the nose. That's Bins.
Bins. Bro. Pleasure, as per usual.
Pleasure.
Tasty, man.
Tasty.
Cheers.